Is difficulty overrated? Yes, it is. So the theme of this presentation is really about using product experiments to advance design theory. So we started with a body of theory, flow theory, that made recommendations about games, that good games should be neither too hard nor too easy. And we ran a series of experiments with thousands of online players, and we couldn't find any evidence that games could be too easy, only too boring. And one implication of this is that a lot of the design theory that we use hasn't been empirically validated, particularly in particular subpopulations. But with millions of online players and hundreds of juicy hypotheses, there's a lot of work to do. So product experiments are usually used for finding better designs, like an A/B test. Put out version A, put out version B, see which one makes you more money, choose that one. But there's no reason why you can't use online product experiments to test generalizable theory. The only problem is that companies tend to have the products and academics tend to have the questions. But ideally, we can move to a place where we're continuously improving both outcomes and theory in this virtuous cycle where theory informs design, designs go to scale. Once you're at scale, you can run experiments, and those experiments can either drive improved outcomes, as in A/B testing, or they can support scientific investigation and theory testing. And ideally, we could be building up a body of empirically validated theories, design theories, about how and why designs affect human interactions. So I started with flow theory, which is my favorite theory. I love it. I love this guy, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. His name is a lot harder to spell than to say, actually. And he writes about optimal experiences, when we're just really at the peak, in the zone, rock climbing, competitive sports, competitive chess, and then having great conversations. You also get flow states from having great conversations or doing hobbies and art and playing. Just playing can trigger flow. But the thing that connects all of these pieces together, he says, is this feeling of novelty and challenge. But nobody ever talks about novelty. It's only challenge. So flow theory has been formulated in this way, where flow occurs at the intersection between challenge and ability. If you have too much challenge, it's frustrating. If you have too little challenge, it's boring. When it's just right, it's enjoyable. So not too hard, not too easy. This has been formulated further into this flow curve. So they say that this theory, it implies a curvilinear, inverted U-shaped relationship between difficulty and enjoyment. And notice, so this is Sami Abu Hamda and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi from a couple of years ago. And notice that challenge and difficulty, they're interchangeable. I disagree with that. I think that challenge is a much richer concept. Difficulty is essentially your probability of failure. So, and they use that in this study of over 1,000 online chess players. They had people self-report their enjoyment after the game, and they used as their measure of challenge their likelihood of winning, which was based on their ELO chess rank. So if you've got the same ELO score as someone else, you have a 50% chance of winning. And they found that people most enjoyed the games when they only had about a 20% chance of winning, when there was an 80% chance that they'd lose. And they found this nice inverted U-shaped curve. But there's a couple issues. So first of all, there wasn't random assignment, and they could choose their opponent based on their ELO score. So this created an issue because your ELO score is based on who you play. And if you play someone who's better than you and you win, then your score goes up. And if you play someone who's worse than you, your score goes down. So there's some other extrinsic incentives here beyond just the challenge. So loving flow theory as I do, we designed this game. I really wanted to find the optimal level of difficulty in this game. And the game was about number sense. So this was a statistic that struck me that 50% of 8th graders couldn't put these 3 fractions in the right order. This is something you shouldn't have to find the lowest common denominator or otherwise. You should be able to have a sense for the relative magnitude of those fractions. And so to help students develop that intuition, we designed this game, Battleship Numberline, to give students practice relating the fractions to lengths of a number line. So I'll show this really simple game. You see a ship, you type in a fraction where you think it is, between 0 or 1, you drop a bomb. Or you see a fraction, and the submarine is hidden. So you've got to click at where you think it is. Okay, there's a time limit, some feedback, very, very simple game. We redid it recently. It's the same game. Now it's HTML5. Okay, so one thing that's really nice about this game is that it's very easy to manipulate the difficulty. So you want to make it easier, you can make the ship bigger. You could be more inaccurate and still hit it. You reduce the time limit, that makes it harder. Some items are easier than others, like fractions versus whole numbers. And so to find this optimal level of difficulty empirically so that we could improve the game for all the players, if it's 80% probability of failure, then let's make it that, and then it'll be a more motivating game. We ran this super experiment. So a 2 by 9 by 8 by 6 by 4 by 4 factorial, just varying everything. And what we wanted to do was measure the success, the probability of failure for each of these different conditions and the underlying factors. And we wanted to measure how long people played, because that was our behavioral measure of motivation. And we were really surprised to not find this inverted U-shape. What we found is that there was an optimal level. It was as easy as possible. So you couldn't make the game easy, even when they were beating it at a 90% success rate. So there's a couple differences between the chess study and our study. Kids in school playing a fraction game, very different population. Online chess players, they're probably experts. It's a different population. Chess and Battleship Numberline are very different games. We operationalized our measures differently, so self-reported enjoyment versus behavioral measure of motivation. But one thing that we could replicate was the study design, since they didn't use random assignment and they let people choose their opponent's skill level, which is essentially choosing their own difficulty level. And the reason why we thought that would make a difference will be explained in the next talk on Bernard Wiener's attribution theory of motivation. So I'm going to spend very little time on this, but suffice to say that if you play someone who you know is a lot worse than you at chess and you beat them, you won't feel as good about it. And if you lose, you'll feel even worse. So this idea that we attribute based on the conditions of the task. So we thought that if we let people pick their level of difficulty, that if they pick something that was very easy, they wouldn't be as rewarded by their successes, and they'd be more ashamed of their failures. So we had 4 conditions explained in the paper. I'll explain 2. You could either choose your difficulty level, or you were blindly assigned a difficulty level. And sure enough, what we found is that when people chose their difficulty level, it suppressed their motivation. So that's the dark line. And you see that the dotted line, which is blind assignment, people were playing for longer when they didn't know how hard it was. And so the implication here is that that may have accounted for this inverted U-shape in the chess study. And it also had some implications on the role of attribution theory in games and motivation. There's a nice model of player persistence that you can check out in the paper. We also thought maybe the pattern of choice in very easy to very hard would resemble an inverted U-shape. would people be selecting the moderate difficulty more often? Not really. It was mostly easy and surprisingly a lot of very hard. So people were sort of exploring the range. Okay, back to the chess study. They didn't just look at challenge as a factor of game enjoyment. They also looked at suspense, the dramatic suspense of not knowing who's going to win. You watch a sports game, if someone's just destroying the other team, it's not nearly as fun to watch as if there's some good suspense about who's going to win. People like close games, whether they're watching them or they're playing them. So we set out to test this as well. We had to dissociate people's ability level from their likelihood to win, so we randomly assigned them to different success criteria. So you might have 40% of the ships that you'd have to destroy successfully to win, or 60%, 80%, 100%. At the end of the level, the number of ships you destroyed would count up. If it met or exceeded the number on the trophy, there was a nice animation, you won the game. If not, wah wah. And we found that if you were close to winning, you were more likely to keep playing. Now, the thing to notice here on the right is that when you won the game, being more successful did not improve your subsequent motivation. So we would expect that line to continue up linearly, but instead what we find is that people that were more successful than they needed to be, even after we took into account their success rate, when we just looked at the closeness of their game, they played more for longer when they had a close game. So there was one other factor in that super experiment that we needed to return to, which was the role of novelty. One thing we noticed was that the number of items in a level of the game had a big effect on how motivated people were. So if there were only 10 items in the game and they just repeat and repeat and repeat, it got boring. If there were 100 different items, it kept up the novelty. It was a more diverse experience. And so this idea that novelty is this factor in motivational design, it seems straightforward. So we sought to test this. And this is a theory really that comes from neuroscience. And Berlin did this wonderful study of aesthetics. He described this curve as novelty increases, it becomes more pleasant to a point, at which point it's not so pleasant anymore. This was based on Donald Hebb's theory of an optimal level of arousal in the brainstem, that actions that move you closer to your level of optimal arousal will be reinforced. So if you're bored, things that are stimulating will be nice. Things that are, when you're overstimulated, things that reduce your stimulation will be nice. They'll be reinforced. And so again, this is a sort of neuroscientific theory that we're testing at scale. And so the way that we want to do this and look at the relationship between novelty and motivation is we're going to randomly assign people to different length of levels. So if your level is 5 items long, after 5 items, we're going to change the design on you. We've got one of 24 different designs. You'll be randomly assigned this. And so every 5 items, you're going to get a different design. You're going to experience more novelty than someone whose game changes every 10 items or every 20 items. And so this is how we were manipulating novelty in the study. And we got a really nice inverted U shape on the top there, significant curvature, meaningful effect size. And so on the left, it's changing every item. Every item the game changes. It's too much. On the right, it only changes every 100 items. So it basically never changes at all. But in the middle, it's more motivating. You're playing for longer. So reflecting on this, we've got a lot of limitations. This is one game. It's a simple game. It's an educational game. You never know how well something will generalize until you test it. It's always empirical. But we couldn't measure things over time. And this is a more serious limitation. maybe people were quitting sooner, but they were coming back to play, and we just couldn't measure that. This is an online experiment, so there's lots of noisy data, but we're making all of our data and analyses available at datashop.org, and I'd encourage the same. So we looked at a bunch of different hypotheses. 15 minutes. Okay, so 15 minutes, 4 large experiments, a bunch of hypotheses. I think it's fair to say that difficulty may be overrated, and I think that novelty is underappreciated in the games community, especially because of the dominance that flow theory has had. And I would wonder, if we do separate out challenge from difficulty, where difficulty is just your probability of failure, challenge can be something richer of a concept. And I would wonder the degree to which novelty plays an important role in the nature of that challenge. And finally, I'd wonder whether it just is a factor of flow, because none of these models of flow include novelty. It's just not part of the measurement of flow. So when you're running these product experiments, millions of subjects, there are some different affordances for the kinds of questions you can ask and the methods you can use. I love Malone and Lepper's taxonomy of intrinsic motivations for learning, 25 different heuristics for designers for designing enjoyable learning experiences. The very first one is that we should have an intermediate level of difficulty, which, I don't know, I mean, I just wouldn't think about, oh, this game's too easy, we need to make it harder. I would be thinking about how to keep the interest level up. I just wouldn't be thinking that easiness is a problem. Now, there's definitely games that are based on difficulty. We can talk about that. But I think that especially for educational games, don't be patting yourself on the back if it's like difficult. People like to win. So there's a lot of different taxonomies of motivation. These can all be subject to empirical testing. Just in closing, I finished my postdoc. I'm now running a business called PlayPower Labs. We do contract work for education companies. The thing that I'm really excited about, I'm not planning on leaving academia, but we're helping a couple different companies now embed experimentation infrastructure. And my goal is really to help run these experiments in this virtuous way where we can both improve student outcomes and also contribute to learning science. Final piece, I would have liked to have published that final study down there about automated experimentation after this one, but this paper was rejected 4 times. I really appreciate everyone in the audience. I appreciate the reviewers and the organizers. So thank you very much. I'll take questions.
Question, I'm holding to the microphone. So I've experienced the difference in the way that people approach some of these educational learning and ITS kind of things based on the environment. So in a classroom experience, it seems to me that there's more often this performance goal approach, right? And with the test, there's most likely have a mastery approach. I'm wondering if that's played into your model.
I bet it totally does. Remains to be seen. The thing that I wonder about is so many games really aren't that hard. Like most of the actions you take, you get positive reinforcement. And so I just wonder whether we've been overstating the benefits of it. Thank you very much. Thank you.